Hey everybody, Al Iverson here. Welcome to 2026 and my first episode of your email authentication and deliverability questions answered for this year. Today I want to talk about the January review and reset for email senders. Or you survived Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Now what? Let me explain. So why here? Why now? Why am I bringing all this up? If you are an email sender, especially if you are an email marketer or you work for a company in retail, you know that Q4 really is the busy season with Black Friday and Cyber Monday rolling all the way through to Christmas. And so that's sort of the batten down the hatches time. It's not a good time to make infrastructure changes. It's not a good time to add necessarily new sending services, new email marketing platforms. It's all about stability and survival and ultimately marketing success. So now we've gotten through that, and it's time for that January review and reset. And here's what I think you should be considering now that we've gotten through that fourth quarter and we enter the new year. After, of course, reviewing 2025 results, it's time to plan your 2026 email marketing calendar, preparing for list growth and your marketing targets for the coming year. And that could involve ESP infrastructure changes. A lot of platforms use dedicated sending IP addresses and dedicated sending domains. Do you have enough of the right branded infrastructure in place, warmed up, ready to go right now? Now is the time to look at that, to plan and work through the process to ramp up or prepare to ramp up additional sending IP addresses on whatever marketing platforms you might be using over the coming year. Then that's really, very much marketer or retailer focused, but going a little broader than that, now is a great time to review your infrastructure. In particular, one thing that people seem to be missing, seem to be forgetting, is to review DNS for all of their existing email sending infrastructure. Check in for proper forward and reverse DNS. Google added a whole bunch of SMTP level deferral and rejection feedback to DMARC reporting in mid 2025. And what we saw is that with Google's ramped up enforcement of their sender guidelines that came in November, they started blocking millions of messages that were coming from IP addresses with misconfigured DNS. So this is mail that might have otherwise been compliant, but was set up to send from infrastructure that was misconfigured. In the past, the big mailbox providers were not necessarily blocking based on that misconfiguration. Things have changed now. Google is rejecting mail where DNS is misconfigured for your sending IP addresses, and that seems to have caught a lot of people by surprise. Maybe you knew about this, maybe not. You might need to go back and look at your sending stats for November and December and see, did you actually have a whole bunch of bounces that you could perhaps trace back to these new SMTP codes, specifically referring to DNS misconfiguration, problem with reverse DNS, problem with pointer records, and so forth. And remember that when you make DNS changes, this should never be done in a vacuum. It should never be done silently. Now is the time, if you didn't already have alerts set up for missing or modified DNS records, it really is important to get that in place because, like I said, Gmail and others are actively blocking mail because of these failures. And these failures are out there in the wild and they are happening somewhat broadly. It'll help you catch issues before mailbox providers do. In other words, it'll inform you that something is misconfigured before you have a chance to see millions of email messages get rejected unexpectedly. And that's why this is so important because these DNS failures do cause blocking nowadays. Now let's talk about DKIM key management. Now, DKIM keys were not meant to live forever in DNS. You want to swap them out periodically so that if a key is ever compromised, the amount of bad things that can happen is limited somewhat by having it not be there forever. And so now is a good time to go through the DKIM keys you might have in DNS. Look for ones that are no longer used that can be removed. Look for ones that are in use that could be updated and swapped out, rotated. And keep in mind that anything you don't need, you ought to think very hard about deleting from DNS because what does not exist in DNS cannot be exploited later. And this is something that Valimail's Enforce platform can help you with. It can help you manage DKIM keys to swap them out, rotate them periodically, and also denote the most recent time that a key has been used. Is it actively used for a sending service today? Or is it something that you had set up for years and it's no longer used? So you might as well delete it. Now let's talk about SPF, Sender Policy Framework. I think now is a good time for a full review of what's included, what are all the different includes in your SPF record. Look for expired services and dead domains to remove. Same deal as with DKIM. What doesn't exist in DNS cannot be exploited later. Fewer includes means less overall risk. And in particular, be on the lookout for services that might have changed their name or retired, domains that no longer exist or no longer represent the brand of a vendor you might be using. You want to delete all of those and make sure everything's updated so that you don't run into a situation later where a bad guy gets a hold of a domain name and is able to authenticate mail as you, taking over a domain that was once a legitimate service you might have been sending mail from in the past. And DMARC, our old friend DMARC. Now's a good time to look at your DMARC policy, look at the DMARC data, look for missed services and the potential for legitimate mail that might be failing authentication checks because you don't have it set up to authenticate properly. Now's a good time to review dashboards and those alert settings. And what about your DMARC policy? Are you actually at an enforcement level policy where you're protecting your domain against phishing and spoofing? That's P equals quarantine or P equals reject. Now's the time to do the work to be able to get to that enforcement level policy and actively protect your domain against phishing and spoofing. Other things to consider here: TLS, transport security, MTA, STS settings. Now might be the time to investigate that if you're ready to sort of upgrade your security posture when it comes to email. And also keep in mind, here's something that I really saw a lot of people have missed the boat on a little bit. Who owns DNS authentication and monitoring related to all of this? And also don't forget external vendor DNS. If you are working with a vendor partner that sends bulk email on your behalf, whether that be marketing or transactional, it's probably coming off of their IP addresses. Who is monitoring DNS for those IP addresses? It might be in your best interest to monitor that external vendor DNS to make sure that there isn't some gap in monitoring that they're having that could bite you in the future. And what about escalation paths when something breaks? Do you know who to reach out to if you find a DNS problem or other concerning issue that you're not exactly sure how to fix yourself? And finally, now's the time to consider adding a BIMI sender logo. Now, you've done all the work, you've implemented DMARC with an enforcement posture. Why not show off trust in the inbox? Show people that you are passing all the proper email authentication checks, that your domain is protected against phishing and spoofing. Well, that's what a BIMI logo can help you do. It helps boost engagement, sort of the carrot, the enticement to go along with the stick, the trouble of having to implement DMARC and domain protection. And that's everything I've got for you today. I hope you found it interesting. I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions for future videos. Drop me an email at al.iverson@valuemail.com. And don't forget to visit our website at valuemail.com when you're ready to embark upon your DMARC journey.